are with the platform, and well, we've talked race today, or the fact that the race card has been played from Kelvin Davis to divert attention from his questionable appointments as a minister and huge questions over Matthew Tukaki, who has been appointed as head of the Suicide Prevention Panel. I think that appointment by Andrew Little, who seems to be quiet at the moment. I think playing the race card in that instance is a pure diversion. And the questions being asked of Minister Davis and of Matthew Tukaki have nothing to do with their race. They have entirely things to do with their actions as a government minister and a government appointee. That is not to say that issues of race and racism in our society do not exist and do not need to be addressed, examined, and, if you like, solved in some way. One institution that is often accused of being systemically racist or institutionally racist is our police force. And a recent poll commissioned by The Hui, which is a state-funded Māori broadcast, suggests that 72% of Māori say that police are racist in some way. I wouldn't call that a stellar result, though it does not surprise me. So what do we do because even if it's not true, that perception in itself damages relations between a group of our society, in our society, and our police force. And it's a problem. I'd say it's a problem in reality or in perception. So what do we do about it? Well, one person who has, I think, given some thought to that over quite some time is Sir Kim Workman, who I would call a social justice, criminal justice campaigner. He's done many things over many years, and he joins us on the line now. Kim, thank you. Do I have to call you Sir Kim? Is Kim all right?
No, just say Kim. I think that's makes me feel more comfortable.
Good on you, Kim. Kim, you surprised by the outcome of this survey?
Not really. It was, I think, quite a revealing research, Sean, because while it said that 72% of those surveyed believed there's racism, it wasn't only about personal racism, and it said involving either systemic racism or individual officers. So, and this is the area I think that we're really interested in looking at. And so often that term systemic or institutional racism is misunderstood.
Well, can you explain it to me? Because I'm one of those people who, to be honest, don't have any idea what you're on about when you say that.
Okay. Well, when we talk about systemic racism, it really relates to the policies and the procedures and the practices of the police as a social organisation, and it refers to those policies which end up being a vehicle for bias on the part of those people.
Okay, now let's just work through this slowly, because when you say that there's a systemically racist policy, man in the street like me says that would be a policy saying, we want you to arrest Māori or stop more Māori than Pākehā. That would seem to me to be a policy that was systemically racist. Are there any of those policies that discriminate in police on grounds of ethnicity or race at present?
It's what happens with that legislation, or what happens with that policy.
Kim, you didn't answer my question. Kim, you didn't answer my question. Are there any policies?
Can I give you an example?
Yeah. What a good idea. What a good idea.
Yeah. Okay. In 2003, research was done into the practice that the police had of exercising discretion when they caught somebody in possession of cannabis for their personal use.
Yeah.
Okay. So they could either decide to warn them or charge them.
Yeah.
And what they found was that the in the Canterbury area that Maori who were found in possession of cannabis were 3 times more likely to be arrested
Right.
than Pākehā. Not only that, Sean, but when they appeared before the court, they were more likely to be refused bail and more likely to end up in the slammer.
Well, that's not good, is it?
No. And so...
That was nearly 20 years ago. Has that changed? Do you know?
I don't think it has, but we don't know. I don't honestly know because
Okay.
I don't... There is a research coming out on that, the use of police, of policing practice, and often things like, to give you a more recent example, in 2014 the bail laws were changed, and it was an attempt on the government's part to ensure that less people got bail.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they did was reverse the burden of proof policy, so that in before that, when people appeared before the court and the court was deciding whether or not to refuse bail or grant it, it was up to the police
To prove that they might be a risk.
Sorry?
To prove that someone might be a risk or shouldn't have bail.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they had it was their responsibility. So they reversed that, and so it was up to the offender to demonstrate to the court that they should be bailed. You go to a district court today, and you see the people lining up who have been arrested for drug use or family violence, and expect them to be able to convince the court that they should be bailed when they don't have the verbal
Yeah, but
skills.
are they all Maori? This is the same rule applies to everyone. Kim?
Yes, yes, and of course when
So
there's
what's racist about
all
that?
Maori, hold on, can I finish?
Yeah.
Okay. What we found was that Maori charged with the same offence as Pākehā were twice as likely to be refused bail.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah. And that resulted, Sean, in an extra 1,500 Maori being remanded in custody over the next 3 years. And then you ask yourself, what happens when those young Maori, some of them never been to prison before, end up in prison? Well, I'll tell you what happens. The first day, they get heavied by the gangs to join.
Yep.
And if they refuse, they get the bash. They have their property taken from them by gang members, and then they're asked again, and if they still refuse, they get the bash. And so what happened when they introduced that legislation was that the number of gang members increased significantly because prison is a major recruiting ground.
Yeah, and you were feeding fresh meat into the grinder.
Exactly, and it had, while the 501s certainly had a serious impact, that legislation, and by the way, it still exists, had an equally devastating impact.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying here, Sean, is that we introduce legislation, often, with an attempt to say, oh, well, we don't want to see people getting out too quickly if they might be a danger to the public. The problem is that when they come out, they're an even greater threat because they've been institutionalized and hardened and lacking in trust. So the police have to cope with that, when they come out. And of course, the police respond sometimes to that by targeting those communities where there's high crime.
Well, that seems logical, to be frank.
Yes, it does. But let me put it to you this way. The testing, for example, around methamphetamine, there's an assumption that those communities, use meth to a really high degree. And the policing, means you can make random stops to check people's, driver's license, warrant of fitness.
Yeah.
But it can also lead to evidence of other stuff.
Okay.
And so when you police Otara and leave Remuera alone, the evidence is clear that the examination of wastewater in Auckland shows meth in Devonport and Remuera. So my question then is, why are the police focusing on the low-picking fruit and not randomly stopping the middle class who may be actually using cocaine instead of meth?
I hear you, Kim, and I think you've actually put those positions incredibly well. Can I ask you what the solution is, or what you see as the solution?
Yeah, I think the what we have to do is to start digging more deeply, Sean, into police practice. And I'm not saying here that individual police are racist. What I'm saying is that when you think about what I've talked about, they're driven by policies that the police have decided on, have developed, and practices that they have developed. And if those practices are producing an unfair result, then we have to draw that to the attention of the police. So what this research is... can I say something else, Sean? I've been reading these bloody reports about racism and bias over the last 20 years. And there's been a whole lot. I think there was 15 or so that I can think of that were produced between 1998 and 2009. And everybody talked about the problem, but nobody did anything about it.
Yeah.
Now, this research that we're doing at the moment is taking it to the next level, saying, let's dig deep, let's find out what's going on in the system and address it.
Okay, when's that research going to be out?
Well, it will take... We're just about to appoint a research team, and we're interviewing over the next 2 or 3 weeks to do that hard work.
All right.
But prior to that, in the last 12 months, we've been having conversations. The panel that I lead, is a pretty heavy-duty panel. Got people like Professor Paul Spoonley, Lady Tuleti Moxon, Kylie Quince, all those, heavy hitters. We've been having conversations with the police operational staff, a group of 25 police from around the country. And what we've found was that we're on the same wavelength.
Yeah.
That the police don't want to be seen to be racist. What they do want to be seen to be is fair and equitable. And if there's systems that aren't working properly, they want those addressed, and they're starting to identify those issues themselves.
That is really encouraging, Kim. That's really encouraging.
Yep.
And I'm not trying to divert, I just want to segue. I've talked on the program this morning about the issue of race because it has been brought up in relation to a news story being run on TV1 and some stuff we've covered here on the platform about a chap called Matthew Tukaki, and indeed the wider thing about co-governance in Three Waters. And we have a government minister, Kelvin Davis, the MP for Te Tai Tokerau, And he has come out and defended this guy, Matthew Tukaki, who appears to have lied on his CV and done a number of questionable things, but yet has just been appointed head of a suicide prevention panel by the government. And Kelvin Davis, who is the Children's Minister, has said that Mr Tukaki, who hasn't adequately answered any of the questions about his character, he says he's dismissed all these concerns by saying some people don't like the uppity Māori. And he's played the race card in relation to what is a matter of public interest, I think, and appropriateness of someone in a public role. I would say the problem is, just having talked to you and the serious research you're doing and the issue you've identified, the issue of race or racism in New Zealand is a real one, but in that instance, we have it being used as a deflection mechanism for people not to be accountable. And I'd say it does your work no good when a Minister of the Crown is playing the race card in that context. And I'd be interested in your view or perspective on that.
Well, I can't comment on that, Sean, because I don't, have the detail, and I don't want to make a public comment about something that I.
But you would be aware. You would be aware, Kim, because you must consume some news media. There is a narrative that now runs any criticism of Three Waters, any criticism of Nanaia Mahuta, any criticism of anything Kelvin Davis, a Māori MP, or indeed Mr Tukaki does, is countered with the retort, you must be a racist.
Yes, and of course it works in the opposite direction too. When you have people who, play the race card in terms of perhaps wanting to win an election, for example, and denying.
Who's done that? Who's done that?
Well, I'm not. You must have not read the papers for the last 10 years if you can't think of it.
The only person I've seen doing that is Winston Peters, and he's a Māori.
Oh, right, okay. Well, I don't want to identify personalities. But look, let me... I think it's important that we have a proper conversation about that.
Yeah, me too.
Because I can give you an example, with my own family. Mm-hmm. And I've got two whāngai children, both Māori. One of them is obviously Māori, one is not obviously Māori. And I've always remember the older boy who was head boy at college did really well, and he and his mates decided to get a job. We know about just before they left college at the local Queensgate, and they all put in their CVs to all the retailers to get a job. Mm. And he was the only one that missed out. And he was head boy at the college. And he couldn't understand it. And he said to me, Dad, I must have put something wrong in my CV. And I said, well, let's have a look. So we looked at it, and I said, why don't we change it a bit? So we changed his name from Matiu to Matthew. We didn't mention that he'd gone to Kura Kaupapa. We emphasised the fact that he was in the choir at St Matthew's Anglican Church. We excluded the fact that he'd won a Te Reo Māori competition. And
he gets the job.
He resubmitted the submission, the reference to 9 retailers, and 8 of them wanted to employ him.
Wow. Yep, okay. I hear.
That's systemic racism, Sean.
Yeah, I hear, and very, very good example. I still come back and ask you the question, is it appropriate for politicians, government appointees and people in authority to try to avoid criticism or scrutiny of their actions as public servants or as politicians by screaming racist at anyone who questions them.
I think what we need is to put aside that sort of labelling stuff and start having honest conversations with one another.
Okay, well, do you think Kelvin Davis is having an honest conversation when he refuses to address issues about Matthew Tukaki by saying the people criticising him, who happen to be Māori reporters, don't like the uppity Māori?
Yeah, well, I think we need to get away from that sort of political rhetoric, don't we?
I think we do too.
Yes, and I think what we do need to do is start being honest about people's, shortcomings or whatever, rather than focus on that. I mean, I can give you one example after another of people being constantly put down, because they're Māori. And then reacting, negatively to that publicly.
Yeah, and it becomes a sort of whirlpool, doesn't it, of negativity?
It does. I was talking to a Māori woman last week, Sean, who has done very well as a consultant in strategic planning, governance and stuff. So she decided to treat herself after, 25 years of endeavour and bought an Audi motor car. She got stopped 8 times in 2 months, and not for speeding. But the first question she was asked was, do you own the car?
Do you own this car? Yeah, that's rubbish. That's rubbish. Hey, Kim, lovely talking to you. I look forward to seeing that research, and thank you for your time this morning.
Lovely talking to you, mate.
Cheers.
Take care.
Cheers. Campaigner, social justice campaigner Kim Workman. At least he's working off data, or at least he's gathering data, but you heard him say it. We need to get away from the sort of rhetoric that Kelvin Davis is using. We cannot live in a country where publicly elected officials dodge their responsibilities to tell the public the truth and be honest by screaming and playing the race card. End of story.